Nothing unites us like doing good together. On June 11th, join the American Heart Association for the Lawyers Have Heart 10K, 5K, and Fun Walk. We will be back in person in Washington, D.C. to unite our community around better health and well-being and raise critical funds for a world of longer, healthier lives. With our virtual option, you can even participate from anywhere around the world. To register and for sponsorship opportunities, visit www.lawyershaveheartdc.org. This is not just another finish line, it's a movement for the health and well-being of us all. We hope you'll be a part of it. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including Harity & Harity LLP.
Welcome to Brief Encounters. This year, the DC Bar turns 50. Since 1972, the DC Bar has been setting the gold standard for legal excellence. Join us as we commemorate the trailblazing accomplishments and ideals that have shaped our history and define how we continue to raise the bar for the next 50 years together. Visit 50years.dcbar.org to learn more. So welcome, everyone. My name is Andrea Rodricks. I am a senior program attorney within the Communities Office, and we are actually here to address one of the pillars of our 50th anniversary year, diversity and inclusion. So diversity and inclusion are more than core values for the DC Bar. These values are part of the bar's DNA. We are an inclusive bar with a diverse membership from all walks of life. While we live these values every day, collectively, we still have a lot of work to do to fully embrace diversity and create a more equitable and inclusive legal sector for all. So as I mentioned, that is, we're here to talk about diversity and inclusion. And one of the exciting things is that the Communities Office in the summer of 2020, we created a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. We put out a call for members to volunteer as part of a working group. We actually ended up getting so many volunteers interested in this initiative that we expanded and created project groups as well as the working group. So I am here today with Charles Lowery and Steven Miller, who are members of our Communities Committee and liaisons to the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. So last year, the working group, we looked at two different areas of diversity and inclusion. The working group divided into subgroups, the best practices group led by Charles Lowery, and then the organizational health indicators for diversity led by Steven Miller. So these projects came out of suggestions from our Communities Committee, and the working group was sort of tasked with how to approach these projects and create a report with recommendations for how to implement some diversity and inclusion tools for these two areas. So again, best practices and organizational health indicators for diversity. So welcome, Charles and Steven. I'm thrilled that you are both here to talk about the subgroups and the reports. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Andrea. It's been a pleasure working with you on this initiative.
Thank you. I have to say, all of the volunteers in both of your subgroups have been so dedicated to this effort.
I would particularly like to recognize the members of the Organizational Health Indicators Working Group who worked tirelessly for this effort. As Andrea mentioned, I was the chair of this group, but the members included Robin Ernst, Jennifer Lee, Mikhail Sklante, and John Tajak. Mikhail was still is a law student, and the others are seasoned lawyers who are working in various other capacities with the DC Bar communities right now. And so they gave their heart, their brains, and their souls to this effort to make it work.
Andrea, I would also like to thank my committee, Deanna Dow, Deontay Silvertooth, Charlie Limley, and Kathy Shanson for their hard work. They did a great, fantastic job in terms of researching our report that we'll be talking about. We just couldn't have done anything without them. It was great to have a team that really took each part of the report seriously and then provided us with great information.
I would just like to give a special shout out to Andrea herself, because as I mentioned in our meetings last week, she not only facilitated the effort, she represented the views, the objectives, direction of the DC Bar communities, but she also was an advocate for the views, thoughts, and ideas that were expressed by our working group. And to blend all of that together and to help us produce the product that we did, I think it was incredible. And it wouldn't have happened without Andrea's talents and expertise. So thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, I like to echo that. Thank you so much, Andrea, for all your hard work on this.
Thank you. It was my pleasure working with all of you on these projects, and all of the volunteers are dedicated volunteers. I will talk a little bit sort of at the end just about some of our project groups and the work that they're working on, who also those groups are, full of dedicated volunteers as well. So, but thank you both for your kind words. It has been my pleasure working with you on this. So I did want to just talk a little bit about the two reports that your groups created and some of the recommendations contained in those reports. Charles, do you want to provide us a little bit of information about how your group approached, looking at best practices? I think when we started these two projects, we didn't have a clear definition of exactly what we were looking for. We wanted to give the group some flexibility in that. So I know, the first step for both of you was sort of in your groups was to figure out, how to approach this and what to look at. So Charles, do you want to give us a little bit of information about that?
That would be great. I think that for our group, because none of us were experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we were all interested. We did take the lead from Deanna Dow. Deanna has been such a great member of our group because the work that she's done within communities with I think it's the Corporation
Finance and Securities Law community.
Yeah, that community. She has been at the forefront of that community as they really rolled out their internal diversity effort, right? In terms of talking about the issues, making sure that their speakers were diverse. And so she was a great resource for our committee. I think that as we entered into the effort, we started through Charlie Limley and other members of the committee. We wanted to get some resources and people in to talk with us. So we held a series of meetings with different persons who were either DEI experts or, for example, there are different groups that really help minority lawyers transition into big firm practice, how they work to do that. So we had a number of, and then other researchers. So we started out doing that. I think that was really a positive and helpful information for us. And then we went off on our own and did our own research and then started compiling the different parts of our report.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know there were sort of different sections when you,
Yes.
When your group created the report, just how you approached, how you decided on those were the sections that you were going to focus on.
Yeah.
And you can talk just a little bit about, what's in those sections.
Sure. So just when you look at the title of our report, it's called the Lawyers Toolkit for Diversity and Inclusion. So we moved away, Andrea, from the idea of best practices because we're still new in this area. And we thought that we're not sure we know what all the best practices are, but we thought that our report would give a better sense of what attorneys, lawyers, law firms, others would give a toolkit or some existing resources to look at the D&I issue, diversity and inclusion. So we started out we came to that name after we did our work, but we started out by trying to define diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we found that there are a variety of different descriptions and definitions for the term as we might expect, because there are different ways that the term is used. There are different environments that it's used in. So we wanted to first provide that sort of to give a general overview of the DEI initiative. And then we looked at surveys. And this was one part that I worked on. We looked at the National Association of Law Placement. We looked at the American Bar Association. We wanted to look at the surveys and data that exists on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then show what the findings were there, because they were very impactful to us knowing what the issue is and how to move forward. We then looked at diversity and inclusion in recruiting and retention. We thought that was particularly important, and we had some research done around that to really look at in different areas of a lawyer's life in terms of moving into different jobs. What are the obstacles? What are the opportunities, diversity, equity in that world? Our next section was called Fostering a Call for Inclusion. And I thought this is a good section where really Deontay Silvertooth went into detail about I think drawing on his own experiences, feeling included within the legal office you're working in, within the legal environment you're working in. And then we finalized it and ended it with a number of different resources and data from other. It's interesting that there are other state bars in the ABA that have done work in this area. I always mention that the New York City Bar has a pledge that it has put forth. And so there are a number of, the law firms, corporations, and their legal representatives have signed on to that pledge in terms of diversity. I think that's a great idea. It's a symbolic measure, but it does speak to the importance of this. So, Andrea, that's what we tried to do, was to create sort of a toolkit or a resource for people to look at. And we thought it's a living document, one that can be updated, can be changed, can be modified. And it's something for us to work with as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Charles. Stephen, do you want to give us a little bit of background about how your group approached the Organizational Health Indicators for Diversity project?
Sure, Andrea. So we were the first out of the box to develop our survey. So we didn't have the benefit of Charles' group's academic work and erudite thinking and the experiences that they brought to bear. What we did have was folks who were in different capacities, academic, law practice, or in school, or in corporate world, with some exposure and experience to these issues. And then I come from a voluntary bar where I served on the diversity committee of the National Bar, and then now chair the local chapter's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility committee. So the first thing we're trying to figure out was, what do we mean by organizational health indicators, and how does that compare or relate to the best practice group's work? And I suggested that we should look at it as a kind of a thermometer, a health indicator of where we stand right now. And to find out where we stand right now, we decided to conduct a survey. In fact, I suggested we should do two surveys, one within the DC bar communities and the other one from without. There was enough to do just focusing on the internal survey. We thought we need to get our house in order first. We can always come back later and do the other. So maybe we'll do that other one later in phase 2 or phase 3. We wanted the survey to be sound, and we wanted it to be statistically valid, and we wanted to make sure that it would get an adequate response. Because as many people know, it's difficult, even when you've thought through the survey questions, to get those who are filling it out or are eligible to fill it out to do so. And the percentage of responses to surveys is oftentimes very low. So we were very proud when we found that we were able to get responses from over 25% of the leadership of the steering committees of the DC bar communities. We thought that was a significant achievement. More than that, we were able to get comments from these leaders. And so a lot of work went into making that possible, to working out the questions, and then also to providing periodic reminders. We did 3 reminders to everybody that they needed to fill out the survey. So that's how we framed what we did. I don't know, Andrea, similar to what Charles just did, would you like me to go further and describe a little bit more about the scope of the survey and some of the recommendations?
Yes, please. That would be great. We'll talk a little bit about the actual recommendations in a bit, but just sort of how you approached, because you also, your report, the Organizational Health Indicators report, also has sort of categories in it of how you sort of approached it. So yes, if you could give a little bit more information about, the categories of your survey and maybe how that translated to the categories in the report.
Okay, so we had a few categories for our survey. There were a number of questions in each category. The first category, fairly straightforward. Tell us about your leadership role in your DC bar communities. So this was a way to get basic information about the context in which the respondents are sitting. The second category, and this is the key category, we think, which led to the recommendations, D&I efforts in your DC bar communities steering committees. Very important. And then lastly, the third category, which one would expect, is just one where we were gathering data, voluntary bars, self-reporting on demographics. So I'd like to focus a little bit on the second category, because that's where we got the most comments. And there we were looking to find out what some of the positives, what some of the challenges with respect to getting diverse candidates. And I'd like to zero in on the responses to 8B, which is the issue of success of the leadership in getting diverse membership. And 8B addresses problem areas. And the interesting thing about 8B is that while we've observed, or we've even felt, a perception from the outside of the voluntary and affinity bars that it's difficult to become an elected officer of the DC bar, maybe including the DC bar communities, that it's sort of an insiders group and especially challenging for diverse candidates. What we found was sort of interesting. In that question that I was just referring to, we were getting a different perspective, which was essentially the bottom line being that it's been difficult for some of the DC bar communities to get members of the steering committees, let alone to get diverse candidates. And here is one comment. While I have tried to recruit diverse candidates, it has been very frustrating because the pool of potential candidates is generally not diverse. And historically, my non-diverse colleagues' nominees are really diverse candidates. Even general solicitations across the membership has brought forward interest from no diverse candidates. So I think this was very telling. And there is kind of a communication issue embedded in this that maybe will help to bridge the gap, so to speak. But those responses helped us to formulate our recommendations. And I guess that, Andrea, I'll stop at this point and we'll come back to the recommendations, which for the most part are targeting the DC bar communities and the election process for the DC bar communities, which we understand will be one of the priorities of our next initiatives.
Thank you, Stephen. So I think if we want to sort of talk about, recommendations at this point, I'd like to just turn back to Charles, to talk about the recommendations coming out of the toolkit. So I know that, the toolkit, you really sort of have two main goals coming out of that at this point. Do you want to talk about, Charles, what the two recommendations or the two goals of the group was for the toolkit?
Sure. I think that we saw, and you can help me as well in terms of your work with our group too, but we saw that the toolkit would be could be utilized on the website, right, for the DC bar, and it would serve as an information source for the bar itself, as well as for members of the bar, as well as for our local legal community. And I think that was one of our key recommendations. We'd also like to move this forward to the larger DC bar community. And I think that that's what's interesting about this work is we delve inward, right, and look at within the bar in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. And Stephen and the surveys and other things really show and illustrate that. And then we have the outside part, which is sort of using this toolkit as a baseline, a stepping stone, towards really addressing these issues within the larger bar community. And the DC bar has such a fantastic reputation as a bar, as an esteemed institution within the DMV. And I think the members see this as an opportunity to have the bar in a leadership role as a convener and organizer, really sharing this information with others in the DEI arena. So those are the two areas that we see. And there's a part one and a part two, and sort of an ongoing process for this effort.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, do you want to briefly touch on, I know, your subgroup is thinking that this is sort of an evolving document, and I know that there's thoughts on a part two. Do you briefly want to just touch on what your group envisions that to be?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm excited about that, really excited. And this is a sort of a jumping off for that. I think over time, and we have to manage this according to staff time and your time, Andrea, hopefully continuing to work with us, and the committee's time. But I've had conversations with people like Ben Wilson from Beverage and Diamond, who was a managing partner there for a long time, who's just retired, who gave me some really interesting insights about, and he's also been, I think, on the board of governors. He's well respected in this space, has been doing this a long time. There are networks and resources that he's been working on to help minority lawyers. And so there are also across the district government and within law firms in general now, DEI coordinators or DEI representatives. And so I'm excited about the chance to perhaps convene those people, right? To talk with those people within, they could, as Stephen, within government, within the federal government, within the different bar associations, within the voluntary bar, within the law firms, and really sort of tease out. That's where you could begin to see some real best practices. Perhaps there's some models that would really work. Stephen and I were recently during the voluntary bar meeting. Andrea, you may remember that the Federal Communications Bar talked about a really unique program that they just started with law students, and placing these law students like in these great jobs right in the communications field. Now they've gotten sign on and support from law firms and government agencies that do communications work. But I thought it was really an exciting program that they thought they've found a model that works, and maybe that could be replicated. So I think it's all a matter of really intent and focus and sort of connecting the dots. I think we know that there's a lot out there. How do we connect it and make it work better for all of us? I think that's
Thank
what I
you,
would say.
Charles. And I know, like, when I approach this, I also think of, information sharing is really key to this effort.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think, the toolkit is a great step in that direction. And I know, I think we are both of the thought process that it is an evolving document, that, it's not a one and done,
Right.
It will continue to evolve and grow and become, a resource for the legal profession and the legal community as a whole.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Charles.
Sure.
Stephen, do you want to talk a little bit about the recommendations that came out of the Organizational Health Indicators for Diversity report?
Sure, Andrea. So as a result of our survey and the analysis of the survey results, including what I was just referring to a few minutes ago, our group formulated a number of recommendations, which we're looking forward to their being implemented since the Communities Committee has approved the recommendations. The first one, restructure the DC Bar Communities Leadership page to identify steering community vacancies and increase transparency. Very important, we feel. Making vacant positions more visible would have the benefit of signaling the availability of vacancies to the underrepresented communities and other prospective participants without requiring insider knowledge. And this would also assist majority members with recruiting more diverse applicants. And we broke this down into two separate issues here. One, steering committee elections are perceived as an insider's game. And two, that there has been an issue with the small candidate pool for recruitment. The second recommendation, removing the community's 5-member cap on steering committee members and/or to reduce election inequality. Because several members have identified the community's 5-member cap as an impediment to the inclusion of more diverse candidates on their community steering committee. One member said the reduction in size of the steering committee is a significant impediment to accomplishing the D&I commitment. So by expanding it, we think that would help as well. And the third recommendation, making the steering committee application requirements more visible and include a community's D&I statement of acknowledgement. And that would also involve when the leaders sign up to the steering committees, that they would sign this acknowledgement as well. And the last recommendation, encouraging communities to establish a D&I subcommittee to support identifying diverse leadership candidates. Some of the communities have already done that. The idea would be for each of them to do it. And that way there would be a focus on this issue. We're trusting, and we've observed that many of the steering committees are doing this now to a greater or lesser extent, but there's always room for improvement. And so in highlight, those are our 4 recommendations. I think you can look at them when you view the actual report with the actual recommendations, and we'll be very happy to answer questions and take suggestions as we move forward to focus on election issues.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Do you also want to touch on, I know that your subgroup also envisions sort of this as an evolving process. So what the sort of next steps or part 2 of your project is? I know you briefly touched on it before about, maybe doing an external survey, but do you just want to give a little bit more information about that?
Sure, Andrea. I mean, it's fine to look in-house to see how our leaders feel about this issue right now. But since the perceptions that we've been coping with from our own roles outside of the DC bar and voluntary bars and within the DC bar go beyond the boundaries of the DC bar, we thought it would be kind of important to follow the survey with another survey. And that survey would be directed to the affinity bars, the voluntary bars, of which there are over 30 of them. They regularly participate in the monthly meeting of the president of the DC bar. And I have been participating in those meetings for many years as a representative of the Federal Bar Association. Those meetings are great. It provides an opportunity for interaction with each other and with the DC bar to learn a little bit more about our various activities. Well, we think it would go one important step further to actually present a survey, maybe not the same questions, because these questions are really directed within the DC bar, but a different set of questions that would be targeting the affinity bar members and see what are their current feelings about how the DC bar is treating this issue, and more importantly, what are their suggestions and recommendations to go forward. Now that we're in the process of getting our own house in order and tackling with these very important issues, it would be a good temperature check to then go out and see what they think. I understand we're going to first focus on the housekeeping issue of the election process itself, which I think is very important. But after that, I would very much like to pursue what we call part 2. Now it might be part 2B or part 3, which is to do this external survey. So those of you who are listening to this podcast, who are members of the affinity bars and have thoughts on the subject, please feel free to reach out to me and share them, and we will take them into account at the appropriate time.
That's a really great segue. I did want to mention, as you both know, this is sort of a late breaking update to all of the reports, is that the Communities Committee did meet last Thursday. They approved the reports and the recommendations coming out of the reports. So I am currently working on some process and a timeline for implementation of those recommendations that as we move forward in these projects. I think, as we move forward, Steven, you mentioned, the Communities Committee has also sort of approved the next project for the working group for them to look at diversity in elections, which, will speak to in furtherance of both the best practices and the organizational health indicators report, while we sort of implement the recommendations coming out of the first phase. And then, obviously, as we've talked about for both reports, they're both evolving, as we kind of move forward in these projects. So envision sort of coming back and looking at, the part 2s and the beyonds for both of these projects. I wanted to thank you both for joining us today and providing an update on your subgroups. I think the work coming out of the working group is so important. For those of you listening, we will be starting to share the reports, so you will start to have access to them. We will be putting the information up on the community's web pages. We have a specific diversity, equity, and inclusion resource page, so it will be going up on there, as well as being linked to our diversity statement. The Communities does have a diversity statement. I recommend everybody reading that over as well, but it will be linking the reports on those pages as we implement the other recommendations coming out of both. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. This has been great. It's been nice to share this finally, after the work we've put in over, it's been 2 years, a year and a half, right? It's been a great journey, but it's nice to be at this point where we have some product, both Steven's work and his committee, and then the subcommittee, best practices subcommittee, and being able to now really have something tangible to work with, and then something to move forward with. So thank you for this opportunity to share, and I hope that everyone listening has learned something and can join us in this effort.
And I want to thank Andrea, especially you, as well as Candace and Felicia and Charles for all of his excellent work on best practices. I think that my group, they moved on to other things, but they will be very excited to learn that the recommendations are being implemented. And I personally am very excited to continue in whatever role is appropriate. And in addition to that, I'd like to mention that I'm also been nominated as a candidate for the Board of Governors. And if I'm elected in that role, I certainly will pursue some of these issues as appropriate to the extent that the opportunity exists.
Thank you. I do just want to end today's podcast by giving a little bit of an update on some of our project groups. So as I mentioned sort of at the beginning of this podcast, within the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, which also there's another update to that. The Communities Committee did vote last Thursday to update the name of the initiative. So it is now officially the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Initiative. So moving forward, we did create 4 project groups separate from the working group and the projects that you just heard about. We created 4 project groups touching on different areas. One is the newsletter, project group. They are helping curate the content for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion section of our communities newsletter that comes out a few times a year, sort of working towards a quarterly basis. So that is also a new initiative, the newsletter. So we do have a project group that curates the content for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion section of that newsletter. We also have a youth law project group where they are looking at some initiatives that are targeting youth. So sort of the pipeline coming into the legal profession, if you will, but not at law school or even undergrad level. It's actually at a younger level. So they're really looking at some projects that are geared towards middle and high school students. They also participated in our annual youth law fair that was just held on March 19th as part of an Ask a Lawyer panel, which is great. It allowed students just to ask questions about the legal profession as a whole. So that group is, really sort of creating some initiatives to help, students and younger children or younger students understand the legal profession and, reflect the diversity that we want to see in the profession. And then one of the project groups is our speaker diversity and program planning group. They are looking at recommendations for how to increase diversity within speakers for the programs through the community's office as well as beyond. So they are, looking at how communities can increase the diversity in the speakers that they bring in, as well as building out our speaker diversity database. And then finally, we have our summit group. So this year, we are going into our 2nd annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit. So our last one was held on June 4th of last year. There's still some information on the website if anybody's interested in looking it up, but we are going to be holding our 2nd annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit this June. It'll be Friday, June 10th. So we are in the process of getting registration and everything open and the agenda finalized. So please do be on the lookout for more information on that. But we do have one of our project groups that is really planning and executing that summit. I do want to thank all of the members of our project groups as well for their dedication and involvement in the initiative. They all have been doing such wonderful work. So we are looking forward to more in this area. So, more to come on that. But thank you to everyone. I want to thank again Charles and Steven for joining me today. And we look forward to what the future holds in this area.
This episode is brought to you in part by our sponsors, Chat Agents and the American Heart Association's Lawyers Have Heart 10K, 5K, and Fun Walk. To learn more, check out the description for this episode.